Sherburne Laughlin, and I'm Director of the Arts Management Program here at AU. Welcome to our spring colloquium. This afternoon we have a presenter who really needs no introduction to this audience. We are all avid students of Alan Brown's work, donor motivation analysis, work on audience behavior. This afternoon, Alan is going to reflect on the core process within any nonprofit arts organization, the way it makes programming decisions. Does the programming process generate a sufficiently creative stream of programming ideas that excite donors, engage audiences, and capture the imagination of the community? While every arts group may have a somewhat different approach to program planning, several key principles of artistic vibrancy are broadly applicable and are the focus of our discussion this afternoon. As to Alan himself, he's a very busy guy. I'm going to tell you a couple of the projects that he's been working on, and I like cut this in half. So, Alan is a leading researcher and management consultant in the nonprofit arts industry. His work focuses on understanding consumer demand for cultural experiences and helping cultural institutions, foundations, and agencies see new opportunities, make informed decisions, and respond to changing conditions. His studies have introduced new vocabulary to the lexicon of cultural participation and propelled the field toward a clearer view of the rapidly changing cultural landscape. To give you just a small sense of some of the things he's been working on recently, for 2013-14, Alan's work has been following several different veins. He's been assessing the intrinsic impacts of arts experiences, and that's a continuing focus of his work, most recently through projects with the Australian Council for the Arts, the NEA, and Theatre Bay Area. His paper, Measuring the Intrinsic Impacts of Arts Attendance, was published in the journal Cultural Trends in 2013. With funding support from the Mellon Foundation, Alan led two major research efforts throughout 2013, a study of student engagement in the performing arts for a consortium of university presenters, and an assessment of concert format innovations for the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. Also in 2013-14, Alan is leading a project commissioned by the grant makers in the arts to develop a new national benchmarking system for tracking institutional support of individual artists, and I have a funny feeling it's going to be assigned in fundraising sometime soon. Another focus of Alan's work is developing measurement systems that communities can use to reliably and repeatedly track levels of public engagement in arts and culture, including the Philadelphia Cultural Engagement Index. Prior to his consulting career, Alan served for 5 years as executive director of the Ann Arbor Summer Festival, where he presented Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and many other artists. He holds 3 degrees from the University of Michigan, an MBA, a Master of Music and Arts Administration, and a Bachelor of Musical Arts and Vocal Performance. He lives in San Francisco and has a yellow Labrador Retriever named Golden Brown. Isn't that nice? Something few would know about him, because I asked him and he gave me some answers, some of which I can use. He told me that he is an aficionado of electronic dance music. So we're going to ask him about that later. Woohoo! Welcome, Alan Brown.
Thank you so much, Sherburne. Good afternoon, everyone. It's the first arts audience I've ever seen that doesn't fill up the back rows first. Right. Andrew, we need to do a study of that. Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I love meeting with students and faculty members and being a part of the regeneration of the field. When I was young, I was a child arts administrator. At the age of 23, I got hired miraculously to run a small festival in Ann Arbor, and I had no clue how to do that. But a very senior gentleman mentored me His name is Eugene Power. He donated money to build a theater called the Power Center for the Performing Arts on the campus of the University of Michigan. And he changed my life. He gave me an opportunity when I really didn't deserve one, and it completely changed my life. And to this day, I am grateful to him, and my way of repaying him is to spend as much time as I can meeting with students and helping you all understand your potential, which you don't necessarily see yet. So, I'm going to dive into a hornet's nest of issues today. I'm going to be a little bit blunt and brash and hopefully provocative, and hopefully you'll disagree with some of the things I say today. That's how we learn. I am going to actually give you a talk that I prepared for a recent convening of the CEOs and board members of the largest, of Arizona's largest cultural institutions, which is a group of about 20. So I'm speaking to you as if you are CEOs, and some of you may be, and all of you will be, hopefully, running arts organizations in some capacity. So that's kind of the framework of my remarks. This is a topic that's really been a growing part of my work. As a researcher, I study audience behaviors and patterns of cultural participation in the American population. And it kind of always comes back to programming. If you interview audience members, you just sit down or you do focus groups or surveys, it's kind of, they want to talk about programs. And meanwhile, I go to conferences with, orchestras and opera companies and theaters and presenters, and they're all sort of wringing their hands about not having enough support. And they keep talking about sort of audience development as a marketing problem. And that has caused me to kind of rethink clarify my own thinking about audience development, and kind of shift the conversation to one of programming. So creativity and programming is the topic today. I'll frame this a little bit before I dive in and just say that foundations, some of which are my clients, have invested a lot of money over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, supporting arts groups in doing kind of audience and program experiments. Wallace, Duke, Mellon, Irvine, Hewlett, you name it. And we're really talking about tens of millions, not really hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for various experiments. And this is the results of the last SPPA. So something's not working. Or conditions are changing around us and affecting these rates. If you work in the theater field, this is not a happy picture. It doesn't look like the percentage declines here are great. So we really have to step back and think, what is really working, what is not working in building demand for the arts, and reflect on these investments. And I think a lot has improved with all of this investment. There's a lot of energy around audience engagement, which is kind of deepening the experience. All the things that arts groups do to draw people into the work, through the whole arc of engagement, which I'm sorry some of you had to read that in class, before, during, and after live events in museums or performing arts. And that's good. I see more and more artists who are interested in doing community-based work. I think that's fantastic. The whole emergence of social practice, civic practice work, particularly among visual artists, but dance, theater. You know, this broad notion of community engagement, formerly known as outreach. Much to my chagrin, I learned the hard way that the orchestra, League of American Orchestras, banned the word outreach about 8 years ago. I was quickly corrected when I used it once. Community engagement. And this whole notion of community engagement has really taken foot. And it belies a sort of larger philosophical shift about the need for arts groups to make a difference in their communities. And I think that's driven partly altruistically and also partly by funders and who expect them to make that sort of a difference. New emphasis around active forms of participation, that's another speech. This appreciation for the importance of social fulfillment. You're starting to see people renovate facilities and create these spaces where people can interact with people and talk about the art and have fulfilling social experiences. It's so important. It just blows my mind every time I walk into some of these theaters, you know, Jazz at Lincoln Center being one of them, you know, where the ushers are actually imploring you to leave quickly after a performance. You know, and this is jazz. You know, it's like, no, hang out, engage, talk about it. So anyway, a lot of positive things have come out of this, but on the negative side, it's very frustrating. As a researcher, I see a lot of one-site experiments that may succeed or fail, but because they're not designed to be iterative or repeatable, they just go away. So a lot of abandoned projects, you know, a lot of arts groups experimenting kind of at the periphery of their core and maybe even having success, but unsustainable experimentation and a lot of learning, a lot of investment just evaporates for lack of anywhere to go. Cross-site learning is not in our DNA. In the field, we're not motivated. There's a culture of sort of, if I didn't invent it, it's not been invented yet. Still problems with marginalization of audience development as the marketing problem. And like the snake that swallowed the proverbial pig, arts groups are continuously hungry for another pig. You know, sorry, it's a terrible metaphor. It's just checking that you're awake. But, you know, arts groups that get a big grant, you know, they're like a snake that swallowed a pig. And what's left after you digest the grant but a fatter snake that's very hungry for another pig? That's kind of what we have in the whole field. So, I ask you, is the long-term solution to revenue growth fixing the arts and culture education system, or lowering barriers to participation, or just doing a better job of marketing, or investing in the creative output? Now, of course, this is a trick question. But, you know, if you had $100 to invest, where would you invest it here? And thank you for that. I'm glad you didn't say arts education, because you'd have to find another speaker. I mean, all of these things are critically important to a healthy ecology, but I'm interested in this notion of programming, of the core of the institution, and investing in creative output, because by and large, let's see, from years of audience research, the public responds to creative programming. If you're doing a reasonably good job of marketing, if you hit programming well, generally the community responds. And that's a wild generalization, but I think true. So at the heart of every organization, arts organization, is this creative process, you know, and it's mysterious. It's often unarticulated, uncodified, but it is the most essential process. So what makes that, you know, do you have a model for sustainability? I mean, here's sort of a very sort of cursory, reductive model for sustainability. But this notion of artistic vibrancy, and I'll use the phrase creativity in programming. Community relevance being the other side, the yin and the yang of programming, and then the capital to support it, the financial strategies that make it happen. So it's helpful, I think, to have a framework in your head as a manager of kind of what is sustainability, how are we balancing these three things. But I also think that we need a clearer sense of impact. And this is, I'm not going to go into this very far, except to say that clarity on intended impacts is, I think, more and more important in the accountability environment in which you operate, in being able to talk to people clearly about why you offer programs. Years ago, I developed a value framework. I don't know if some of you have seen this from a paper called An Architecture of Value, where actually I messed with the RAND diagram from Gifts of the Muse and kind of resorted it. And I just wanted to create a usable kind of diagram that people could hang on to and say, this is what we learned from Gifts of the Muse. But basically the whole purpose of this is to show that if you want to talk about economic impact and the kind of downstream, large-scale community impacts of the arts, it all kind of emanates from the personal exchange between an artist and an individual in the moment. You know, so the imprint of the experience at the bottom left-hand corner here, you know, is where it starts, and it kind of emanates from there. And you can talk about personal development benefits. You know, how do your programs make people better human beings? What community impacts? What interpersonal benefits do your programs? Do you program to draw families closer together, for example? You know, all you have to do is interview ticket buyers for like a nanosecond, and you find out about the social value and the interpersonal value. It's like people go out to invest in their personal relationships. It's possibly the #1 reason motivating arts attendance. This is where I get blank stares from artists. You know, like, they're not coming for the art. I'm like, well, partly. And, you know, the magical thing that happens when people leave a program, an arts program, and they argue about it in the car on the way home, you know, and what's happening there is so precious, is this aesthetic negotiation of getting to know your partner or your friend and understanding how they feel about a work of art and how you feel and how you see perhaps differently or similarly. And that dance is one of the main reasons I think people keep coming back. So the point here is, you know, what impact do you want to have? I give this diagram to arts groups, and they kind of wave a white flag, say, oh, we do it all. And what they're really saying is we are more comfortable letting impact be a byproduct of our curating and not actually predetermining what impact we want to have, because we want complete freedom in choosing art, and whatever impact it has is a byproduct. And that's okay. That's your model. I think that's okay. But I think there is a time when you start drawing public resources and your accountability changes, where you need to start talking about impact. What impact do you want to have? And what impact are you curating towards? You know, which is not about dumbing anything down, but about just being more clear. So I think it all starts with a sense of purpose defined in terms of impact. And programming. So at the heart of every cultural organization is a process of conceptualizing and curating art year after year. It's the most essential process. Yet high-level dialogue in our field about what defines programmatic health is nearly non-existent. It's the black box of our field, the inner sanctum of creative expression, where the opposing forces of artistic license and constrained resources battle it out, and where heroic acts of curatorial prowess, risk management, and philanthropic largesse play out behind closed doors. So, let's examine artistic vibrancy, or creativity in programming, with an eye towards sustainability. What is artistic vibrancy? Is it the same thing as artistic excellence? Of course, the answer is no. But more to the point, it depends on how you define excellence. To strive for artistic excellence is a given, just as one strives for excellence in management or excellence in governance. Excellence, to me, is not a brand attribute or a core value or a strategy, because excellence is not a choice. Just as no one shows up at work and commits themselves to mediocrity. Striving to achieve a high quality of work is a basic minimum commitment that we make to ourselves and to our field, and there really is no alternative. When I see excellence in a mission statement, it's a big red flag. Artistic excellence has been conflated with creativity and programming. Too often, excellence is used as a reason to dismiss creative programming ideas as either off-mission or dumbed down, when in fact they are neither. Attaining higher levels of creativity in programming is not about dumbing anything down, but about applying ourselves to an even higher standard than excellence. Good marketing, yes, is absolutely strategic to the arts and culture sector, and we can always do a better job of marketing and communications. But audience development is not a marketing problem. Drawing new people into the cultural system and replenishing the audience is, first and foremost, a programming challenge. One of the things we need as a field is a better definition of quality. Quality in the sense of what defines an institution that is able to consistently bring forth artistically interesting, worthwhile, and relevant programs. Right now, I'm working with Arts Council England on a literature review on intrinsic cultural value, if you can imagine that. Part of the agency's effort to hold itself accountable for its #1 strategic goal of supporting excellence in the field. We're looking at several aspects of intrinsic value. One being the qualities of organizations that bring forth excellent programs year after year. And another being quality in the sense of received impact, impact as received by audiences. We're also looking at what the literature says, which is very little, in fact, about the appropriateness of public agencies taking credit for audience outcomes, when in fact they act as intermediaries and have little to say about programming at the institutional level. So this topic of artistic vibrancy or quality is very much at the top of my mind as I speak with you today. One of the better attempts at building a framework for quality came from the Australia Council for the Arts a few years ago, when they released a series of discussion papers on artistic vibrancy, which I highly recommend. If you haven't seen them already, you can Google Artistic Vibrancy, Australia Council, and you'll get it. And my thinking about a creativity program is very influenced by the Australia Council work. So what is artistic vibrancy? Artistically vibrant organizations have clarity at the board level on the desired outcomes of programs. To what ends do you offer programs, and for whom? What are you hoping to accomplish with your programs? It's a simple question, but not always clarity, particularly amongst board members. I've been working recently with a very prominent museum on the East Coast and conducted a whole bunch of market research and really got to the wall with them that there is no institutional policy or guiding framework around programming. Therefore, curators run wild, do what they're motivated to do without any kind of an overarching framework, and the museum's programs are a hodgepodge of incoherent art. That's a fun wall to hit when you're a consultant, sort of. That's why you always book your flight home the same night at your big meetings. I believe that board members' responsibilities are not only fiduciary, but also creative. In the end, it's up to board members to set policy with respect to programming. I know this is controversial, and there are many examples of where that would never work. But board members' role in this regard, I think, is widely misunderstood. Board members are often told to stay out of programming, and for good reason. But board members are not merely fundraising lackeys. Today, board members need to be activists, not just for their institutions, but activists for freedom and diversity of expression, and champions of culture at the community level. Of course, it's not appropriate for board members to get involved in the details of program planning. But it's also not sufficient for boards to hire an artistic director or chief curator and just pray that things work out. That's what I call the hire and pray strategy. So long as tickets are selling, everyone's happy, but when things start going wrong, they go horribly wrong, and someone usually loses their job. Board members and creative leaders need to find a new way to have a high-level discussion about outcomes and the risks that are necessary to make to achieve those outcomes. It's a vocabulary problem. Boards and creative leaders both need to learn a new language in order to be able to communicate with each other about desired impacts and the risks necessary to achieve them. Do you offer programs to stimulate political dialogue? Do you offer programs to bring families closer together? Do you offer programs in order to build a greater capacity for empathy in your community? Why is it that you offer programs? If you're locked in a programming formula and can't remember why you produce it, it might be time for a discussion about impacts and outcomes. Community relevance is another value system. I would argue that in order to be sustainable, arts groups, and specifically curators and artistic leaders, need to be diagnosticians of community need. This is not about asking people what art they want to see, but about listening, deep listening in the community. Community relevance is a critical component of artistic vibrancy, but it requires diagnostic skills. Just as a doctor does not hand a blank prescription pad to a patient, so a cultural organization should never ask the audience what it wants to see. They do not know the creative possibilities. I don't know about you, but the drugs I would prescribe myself might be different than the ones my doctor would. Thank heavens for the good judgment of doctors, and thank heavens for the good judgment of curators and artistic directors who give us what we would not prescribe for ourselves. Diagnosing need takes a lot of skill and a lifetime of experience. What spiritual, emotional, intellectual, social, and aesthetic needs can you address through your programming? What does it mean to be embedded in a community? Is your audience sufficiently representative of the community you seek to serve, or are you comfortable with the natural self-selection process? The role of diagnostician makes some curators really nervous. They see it as an affront to their creative license. Why, after a lifetime of studying art or science, should an accomplished curator concern herself with the considerably less glamorous work of a diagnostician? To me, there's an important difference between artists who are creators and artists who are curators. While composers, playwrights, choreographers, writers, visual artists, and other creators of original artistic work need not bridle their creative impulses with outside information in order to create brilliant work. Curators have a heavier yoke to carry because they operate at the intersection of creativity and community. Reconciling creative ideals with community relevance is perhaps the highest form of curation. It's not at all about dumbing anything down. Rather, it's about applying your considerable knowledge and curating skills to a higher purpose, one that requires listening, learning, diagnosing, and making inspired creative choices in the context of community need. It's the difference between curating programs and curating impact. To me, the zenith of artistic accomplishment is when a curator acts as an architect of impact. I love going to board meetings and hearing arguments. It's a sign there's a healthy level of disagreement in the organization. In artistically vibrant organizations, staff, artists, and board members debate and disagree openly and regularly about how to balance creative ideals with community impact. It's the central tension in every cultural organization, and it should be a primary focus of debate and discussion between and amongst board members and staff. Nothing is off limits. We need to embrace and explore and even celebrate these two opposing value systems: artistic ideals and community impact. As with so many things in life, clarity often lies at the nexus of opposing truths, because one sheds light on the other and together they illuminate something greater. What do you stand for artistically? What are your artistic ambitions? This is not just a question for curators, but for board members as well. Open dialogue about the changing landscape in which you operate and how to balance artistic ideals with community need is central to organizational health. Artistically vibrant organizations, of course, execute their programs with a high degree of technical proficiency, imagination, and artistry. It goes without saying. This is quality in the conventional sense. But what is the standard for quality? Quality in whose eyes, and quality at what price? Someday I'd like to do a trend study of standing ovations. Why do more people nowadays stand up and clap at the end of live performances? My friends in the UK hasten to point out that this is strictly an American phenomenon. Do audiences rise to their feet because they recognize quality when they see it, or do they rise because they cannot distinguish a good performance from a great performance, and instead take their cue from the first one who stands up? Or do they stand to validate their decision to spend so much time and money on tickets? Several years ago, I led a study of the impact of live theater on audiences in 18 cities. The 18 theaters ranged from some of the most prominent theaters in the US, such as Arena Stage, Berkeley Rep, Public Theater in New York, to the La Crosse Community Playhouse in La Crosse, Wisconsin. The audiences in La Crosse reported impacts as high as the impacts reported by audiences at some of the most prestigious theaters in the country. My point is not to denigrate the role of professional quality acting, but to say that quality is relative. And high impacts are possible, even when the artists are accomplished amateurs or semi-professionals. This is very provocative, I know, because it seems to undermine the value we accord to quality. I think every cultural organization needs to wrestle with this and can come to a different conclusion. What does excellence mean in a community setting? What can be accomplished only with professional artists? And what can be accomplished with community artists? Vibrant arts groups have collateral impact on other arts groups and other community organizations and their constituents through programming partnerships. In an environment where the number of nonprofit arts groups is growing rapidly, but philanthropic resources are shrinking, programming partnerships are one of the few viable strategies for preserving a multiplicity of artistic voices without buckling under the weight of bloated infrastructure. Why would a museum choose to partner with a local horticulture society? Why would a dance company choose to partner with a healthcare network? Why would a jazz presenter choose to partner with a young entrepreneurs group? Why would an orchestra partner with a film school? In an increasingly interdisciplinary world, partnerships will become more and more important. There's a great deal of exciting work happening in the presenting field, and specifically among campus presenters who are recasting themselves as nexus workers in their campus communities, building bridges between artists, students, and scholars in a wide range of disciplines. What would your report card look like if you were evaluated based not only on the impact you have on your own audiences and visitors, but also those of other arts groups and community organizations? Collective impact is truly the wave of the future. Vibrant organizations demonstrate a commitment to continuous improvement on the part of artists and staff, including receptivity to critical feedback on programming and artistry. The hallmark of a professional in any field is welcoming critical feedback on your work. You learn that as students. It's never easy, but it's the only way we can learn and grow. But the cultural sector needs better approaches to generating high-quality feedback for artists and curators. The Australia Council identified a strong peer review system as a key element of artistic vibrancy. There's much, much more we can do as a field to test and refine programming ideas. Concept testing is a widely used research technique in the commercial sector, but it's almost never used in the arts and culture. Only twice in 20 years have I ever been asked to help someone with program concept testing. It was an orchestra, and they were having some problems with their holiday programming. So we designed a simple focus group process to test interest in different holiday programs. We made up a little mock brochure and put in 10 programs. 5 of them were actual existing programs, and 5 of them were pure fiction. Just invented programs that the orchestra thought it might offer someday. Respondents were given an order form and asked to order tickets from the menu of 10 program offerings, and the rest of the focus group discussion revolved around why they made their choices. Sure enough, some of the fictitious programs generated more interest than the existing ones. The orchestra's reaction to this information was not surprising and underscores the old adage, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Ever since that experience, I've wondered how we as an industry might benefit from more feedback on programming concepts, not only from peers but from audiences. The museum field has a long history of formative evaluation and refining exhibit design based on visitor feedback. But the performing arts lacks a similar feedback loop. The irony is that most audience members, for a cookie, will stay after and be thrilled to sit down and give you feedback on programming ideas. Vibrant arts organizations have a deliberative and consultative program planning process. We know so little about how programming decisions get made. Yet this is perhaps the most essential process at work in our industry. The process employed to select programs is absolutely strategic to organizational health and sustainability and should be a matter of board policy. I don't believe anyone has studied this, but I know Andrew will tell me if they have. But I know anecdotally that there are many different approaches to decision-making in use, some very open and deliberative, and others very closed. In some arts organizations, program selection is not dissimilar to the process used by the College of Cardinals to elect a new pope. Behind closed doors, curators fulfill their divine obligation. And with a puff of white smoke up the chimney, the season is announced. In all seriousness, program selection can be very complicated. Many limiting factors come into play, like artist availabilities, budgetary constraints, venue availability, and so forth. Brilliant curators can make brilliant programming decisions behind closed doors without consulting anyone. And audiences maybe never know the difference. But I would argue that in the long run, this is not a sustainable or optimal process for most organizations. I think the optimal process is different for every organization, but I'd like to see more dialogue at the board level about what a healthy program planning process looks like. What are the inputs? Who can suggest program ideas? What process is used for vetting them? What settings and formats will engage our constituencies? Do we have the right creative voices at the table? The shocking truth is that many actors, musicians, dancers, and visual artists have never been asked for creative programming ideas. And the irony is they're full of great ideas. Why is it that so many working artists are seldom involved in the research and development process that is the very core of programming? I'm aware of a few artist-curated galleries, and there's certainly a long history of artist residencies and commissioning work. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about inviting artists, especially young artists and scientists at universities and conservatories, into the curatorial process so that they become contributors to the creative capital of arts organizations. This brings me to another aspect of Vibrancy, which is a full pipeline of new programming ideas. Show me your wish list of programs that you'd love to produce but haven't yet been able to. There isn't a single successful manufacturer that doesn't know what its next product is going to be, or the one after that and the one after that. Of course, they have the capacity to do R&D, to invest millions of dollars in new product development, and we don't have that. But that doesn't mean that we can't plan ahead, or it doesn't mean we can't write down our dreams. A full pipeline of new programming ideas is the lifeblood of a creative enterprise. It is the perfume that intoxicates donors. An empty programming pipeline is the artistic equivalent of bankruptcy. I wish that funders would invest not only in the production of artistic work, but also invest in the process of generating a full pipeline of creative programming ideas. Artistic excellence is not the same thing as creativity in programming. Creative leadership is not the domain of those with big budgets, but those with the biggest imaginations, and those who know how to awaken and inspire creativity in others, and enfranchise them in a dynamic process of generating, discarding, and refining daring ideas for programs that capture the imagination of the public. Frankly, I'm fed up listening to arts groups talk endlessly about pre-performance lectures when they should be talking about new product lines, new formats, and different venues. Whose job is it in your organization to make sure that the creative pipeline is full? Vibrant arts organizations have board-approved policies for managing risk and a pool of risk capital for financing it. Susan Nelson and her colleagues at TDC are at the forefront of this dialogue, along with the good people at Nonprofit Finance Fund and a few others. As young managers entering the arts field, it is absolutely essential that you deeply grasp the principles of capitalization and understand how to lead an arts organization through the process of articulating its capital structure. To paraphrase my friend and colleague Adrian Ellis, the traits of the risk-informed organization are a clarity about what really matters, an ability to retain absolute clarity about what capacities and purposes the organization chooses to protect, what can be negotiated and what is non-negotiable and why. 2, a deep interest in understanding the wider environment in which it operates and the likely impact of changes in that environment in its own scenario. And 3, an equal interest in its own organizational dynamic, the causal relationships that link programs, financial capacity, and organizational capacity. That's Adrian Ellis. The iron triangle, as he calls it. Risk is something that you can and must articulate explicitly as a matter of board policy and manage proactively in a financial sense. I urge both students and faculty to push forward on the pedagogy of capitalization planning. Teach yourselves about sources and uses of capital and the artful nuances of the balance sheet. Artistic reserve funds, program opportunity funds, there's a million names for this, are increasingly used to allow risk-taking without betting the farm and jeopardizing the entire institution if something goes wrong. Even if you're a small budget organization, it's never too early to start thinking about risk and capital. And an increasing number of board members know all about risk and capital from their experience in the technology sector. In closing, I urge you to start a conversation within your organization about creativity in programming. For those of you who are artists, this might mean questioning your self-conception as an artist. For those of you who are administrators, this means inviting your colleagues, board and staff, and artistic leaders into a sustained conversation about creative health, community relevance, and capitalization. This is not a conversation that happens once every 5 years when you do a strategic plan, but a living, breathing dialogue that infuses every aspect of your organization. The only unacceptable outcome is not to talk about it. The larger challenge for each of you is to embrace the notion of creativity in programming, not only within your organization, but also at the community level. In order for artists, for the arts and culture to play a more central role in civic life, each of you must take a small ownership stake in the larger landscape in which you operate. Ecological thinking is what I call it. Ecological thinking is what will take you to the next level, both individually and collectively. A while ago, Molly Smith, the incredibly talented artistic director of Arena Stage, asked me to explain what I meant by ecological thinking. And I asked her, how do most Americans experience drama? And the answer, of course, is on television. And I said, imagine, Molly, if you sent a monthly message to Arena Stage subscribers suggesting what drama on television they should watch, and what's excellent about it. Or what if you dropped a screen in one of your venues on Monday nights and invited people to come down and watch Homeland or Breaking Bad, and talked about why it's great acting? If we don't start owning the larger ecology of creativity, the public will leave us behind. The same is especially true for dance, and also music and visual arts. Why should a professional dance company care about getting people dancing at home? Why should a museum care what's hanging on the walls in people's homes? Only through ecological thinking can we achieve our full potential and make deep, lasting connections with communities and supporters. What can you do? I'd like to leave you with a few concrete suggestions. The first concrete thing you can do is sit down with a cross-section of your audiences and visitors and ask what is meaningful to them about arts, culture, and creativity. Take 1 or 2 days a year and do nothing but interview people about how they experience your art form. The insight you gain will be transformative. The most powerful moment of research in my life was when I was doing door-to-door interviews in San Bernardino, California. I was doing a study for the James Irvine Foundation of Patterns of Cultural Participation. And part of our research design was to do in-person, door-to-door intercept interviews in low-income neighborhoods. And believe me, you haven't lived until you've gone knocking on doors administering a 30-minute protocol about creative expression. And I had just trained a crew of survey workers, were all of color, all multilingual. And I was out training with one of the young survey workers, and we knocked on the door of this house. Tiny little house, and a young girl opened the door, and we said, excuse me, we're here, we had credentials, t-shirts, the whole, legit. And she went and got her mother, who was a Spanish speaker, no English. But we explained why we were there, and she very graciously, I had just told people don't ever go into people's houses, do it at the door, and she invited us into her living room, and I knew she would have been horribly offended if we didn't go. So we marched into her living room. And she sat on the couch with her daughter next to her translating, and she answered every question very thoughtfully and deliberately. And at the end of the interview is sort of my favorite question. I asked, of all the art and objects in your home, which is most meaningful to you, and why? And she sat and thought. She said, it's the painting over my dining room table. And I looked, we were sitting in the living room, and I could see the dining room was just around the corner, and I said, may I look? She said, yes. And I walked around the corner, and here was a horribly faded poster graphic of a fruit tableau in a cheap plastic cracked frame. And I went back to the woman and I said, tell me about this work of art. And she went on and on about the joy it gives her and how when she's really struggling, she sits underneath and looks at it, and it gives her the will to keep going. And I thought, who am I to judge what is excellent? That experience wiped about 20 years of grime off my lens on cultural participation, and taught me how valuable it is to sit down and ask people what is meaningful to you, because we don't know until we ask. Second, I suggest you look at the ways you select programs and think critically about your process. Who is involved? Where do new ideas come from? If you don't have a full pipeline of creative programming ideas, think about changing your process. Ask for help if you need it. Next, think about your diagnostic capacity. What is your capacity to diagnose community need? What does your community need from you? You might disagree with what you hear, but until you listen and really tune in to what your community's aspirations, you can't really reach your full potential as a curator. Then I suggest you take a fresh look at your potential partners. Where in your community can you find collateral value in the missions of other nonprofits or other commercial businesses even? Finally, I encourage you to consider how you can play a leadership role in galvanizing your community's creative enterprise. Whose job is it to get thousands of residents writing poetry or dancing in the streets? To move the big needle of cultural participation, it must be someone's job to look across the system at the larger realm of creative possibilities. This work typically falls outside of our organizational missions, but I ask each of you to consider what role you can play in designing the future of your community's creative life. So ultimately, what will sustain the arts ecology? Better facilities and more funding? Sure, that's important. But what will sustain the ecology in the long run is a constant infusion of new ideas and a healthy process of creative regeneration. If the audience is a reflection of what's on stage, then a renewed commitment to creativity and programming is the single most important commitment you can make to institutional sustainability. Thank you very much.